Hi everyone, my name is Christian, this is Shoosha, and today we are going to be reading part 3 of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I'll give a quick recap first, and then we'll get right into it. Okay, so what happened last time? And in part 1. Heart of Darkness is a novel about a man's journey into the Belgian Congo. Technically all that happens in this novel is there are 5 guys on a boat. Only one of them gets a name, and that is not the narrator, but that is another guy named Marlowe, who is there on the boat telling everybody else a story. Of course, what the novel really is about is the story that Marlowe tells, which is, again, his journey into the Belgian-controlled Congo. So we have this guy named Marlowe who's telling us his story, and in his story we understand that he's a sailor, and when he was a young boy he was kind of captivated by Africa as this like blank space on a map. By the time he's a grown man sailing ships for a living, it's no longer quite a blank space, but it's still this like unexplored area of not only the world, but his imagination. And so he wants to go there when he is looking for work. And he is a bit of a Nepo baby. And so he leverages some family connections to get an interview with the company. We never get the company's name, it's just the company, but we understand that it is like a Belgian-controlled company that is extracting ivory from the Congo. Marlowe gets on a French steamer, which takes him from Europe along the coast of Africa to the mouth of the Congo River. So in general, the journey that we're taking is from the outer station, where the Congo meets the Atlantic Ocean, to the central station, that's where we're going today, and then to the inner station. Thanks for joining us, and let's get into it. Next day, I left the station at last with a caravan of 60 men for a 200-mile tramp. So after spending about 10 days at the outer station, he leaves for the central station, and he knows it's going to be about 200 miles. No use telling you much about that, although he's going to tell us plenty about that. Paths everywhere. A stamped-in network of paths spreading over an empty land, through long grass, through burnt grass, through thickets down and up chilly ravines, up and down stony hills ablaze with heat, and a solitude, nobody, not a hut. The population had cleared out a long time ago. Well, if a lot of mysterious, armed with all kinds of fearful weapons, suddenly took to traveling on the road between Deal, a town in England, a port, and Gravesend, catching the yokels right and left to carry heavy loads for them, I fancy every farm and cottage thereabouts would get empty very soon. So it's interesting because even as Marlowe is participating in this really violent system that the Belgians have set up in the Congo, he understands that, you know, if there were like foreign mercenaries essentially who came to England, where Marlowe is from, and were catching the English people and forcing them into service for some company, he understands that everyone would run away just like the Congolese people have run away. So he can empathize with them, even though he's contributing to their misery. Only here the dwellings were gone too. Still, I passed through several abandoned villages. There's something pathetically childish in the ruins of grass walls. I have to admit that for all the horror and malevolence and just hideous exploitation that we see in the system in the Congo, I can also understand Marlowe's condescending view of the natives, frankly. I can, because he says there's something pathetically childish in the ruins of grass walls. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to live in grass walls either, and I can understand why Marlowe makes the mistake of thinking, essentially, well, because I come from a place where we live in stone or brick or wooden walls, and I'm here in this place where the people have only managed to construct grass walls, like, no wonder this has happened, and maybe this is somehow right, that we who know how to make better and stronger things are here to take over this country. And Of course, the whole book is about bloodshed and the horrors that that leads to, but I, at least, can certainly understand where that thinking starts. Day after day, with a stamp and shuffle of 60 pair of feet behind me, each pair under a 60-pound load. Camp, cook, sleep, strike, camp, march. Now and then a carrier dead in harness at rest in the long grass near the path, with an empty water gourd and his long staff lying by his side. A great silence around and above. Perhaps on some quiet night the tremor of far-off drums, sinking, swelling, a tremor vast, faint. A sound weird, appealing, suggestive, and wild. And perhaps with as profound a meaning as the sound of bells in a Christian country. The sound of far-off drums, that is, that he can just hear faintly in the country. Once a white man in an unbuttoned uniform, camping on the path with an armed escort of lank Zanzibaris, very hospitable and festive, not to say drunk, was looking after the upkeep of the road, he declared. Can't say I saw any road or any upkeep, unless the body of a middle-aged Negro with a bullet hole in the forehead, upon which I absolutely stumbled 3 miles further on, may be considered as a permanent improvement. I had a white companion too, not a bad chap, but rather too fleshy and with the exasperating habit of fainting on the hot hillsides, miles away from the least bit of shade and water. Annoying, you know, to hold your own coat like a parasol over a man's head while he is coming to. I couldn't help asking him once what he meant by coming there at all. To make money, of course. What do you think? He said scornfully. Then he got fever and had to be carried in a hammock, slung under a pole. So this part is really interesting for a number of reasons. We got on the last page that they would occasionally see a carrier dead in harness, like with his pack on, at rest in the long grass near the path with an empty water gourd and his long staff lying by his side. So they'd see these African men who had essentially stumbled off the trail to die, and yet there is this fleshy white companion of Marlowe who, when he faints, Marlowe's annoyed about it, but he holds his coat like a parasol over his head. And then when this guy does wake up and Marlowe's like, dude, what are you doing here? You can't even like keep up with the physical labor of this work. The guy says, I'm here to make money, of course. What do you think? Then he got fever and had to be carried in a hammock slung under a pole. As he weighed 16 stone, I had no end of rows with the carriers. So he weighs a lot, and the African carriers don't want to carry him in a hammock. They jibbed, ran away, sneaked off with their loads in the night. Quite a mutiny. So one evening I made a speech in English with gestures, not one of which was lost to the 60 pairs of eyes before me, and the next morning I started the hammock off in front all right. So Marlowe threatens the African carriers who are still left with violence and says, you need to carry the hammock and it needs to go in front so I can see what's happening. An hour afterwards, I came upon the whole concern wrecked in a bush, man, hammock, groans, blankets, horrors. The heavy pole had skinned his poor nose. He was very anxious for me to kill somebody, but there wasn't the shadow of a carrier near. I remembered the old doctor. It would be interesting for science to watch the mental changes of individuals on the spot. So again, this is the doctor that had given him, Marlowe, his sort of physical checkup and asked if there was any insanity in the family. And Marlowe says, I felt I was becoming scientifically interesting. All this crazy shit that he's seeing in the jungle is starting to get to his head. However, all that is to no purpose. On the 15th day, I came in sight of the big river again and hobbled into the central station. I was on a backwater surrounded by scrub and forest, with a pretty border of smelly mud on one side, and on the 3 others enclosed by a crazy fence of rushes. A neglected gap was all the gate it had, and the first glance at the place was enough to let you see the flabby devil was running that show. You might remember from part 2 that the flabby devil, that Marlowe is referring to here is a rapacious and pitiless folly. Rapacious, given to rape, pitiless, without pity, and folly is like a costly, arrogant mistake. And so he sees that this costly arrogance is clearly kind of the underlying force that is really in charge of the central station. White men with long staves in their hands appeared languidly from amongst the buildings, strolling up to take a look at me, and then retired out of sight somewhere. One of them, a stout, excitable chap with black mustaches, informed me with great volubility and many digressions, as soon as I told him who I was, that my steamer was at the bottom of the river. I was thunderstruck. What? How? Why? Oh, it was all right. The manager himself was there. All quite correct. Everybody had behaved splendidly, splendidly. You must, he said in agitation, go and see the general manager at once. He is waiting. So Marlowe's trekked 200 miles through the Congo and has seen people die, has threatened to kill people, and now he finds that the steamboat he has come to captain is at the bottom of the river. And he's told to go see the general manager of the central station at once. I did not see the real significance of that wreck at once. I fancy I see it now, but I am not sure, not at all. Certainly the affair was too stupid, when I think of it, to be altogether natural, but at the moment it presented itself simply as a confounded nuisance. The steamer was sunk. They had started 2 days before in a sudden hurry up the river with the manager on board in charge of some volunteer skipper, and before they had been out 3 hours they tore the bottom out of her on the stones, and she sank near the south bank. I asked myself what I was to do there, now my boat was lost. As a matter of fact, I had plenty to do in fishing my command out of the river. I had to set about it the very next day. That and the repairs when I brought the pieces to the station took some months. So I went back in previous pages to count it up, and Marlowe has only spent about 55 days in total from going to Europe, sailing along the whole African coast, getting to the outer station, and hiking to the central station. All of that has taken him about 55 days. And now he's going to have to spend several months at the central station fixing up his steamship. Fortunately, Marlowe's a good storyteller, and so he's not going to bore us with every detail of those several months. My first interview with the manager was curious, so we're back to the first day that he arrives at the central station. My first interview with the manager was curious. He did not ask me to sit down after my 20-mile walk that morning. He was commonplace in complexion, in feature, in manner, and in voice. He was of middle size and of ordinary build. His eyes, of the usual blue, were perhaps remarkably cold, and he certainly could make his glance fall on one as trenchant and heavy as an axe. But even at these times, the rest of his person seemed to disclaim the intention. Otherwise, there was only an indefinable, faint expression of his lips, something stealthy, a smile, not a smile. I remember it, but I can't explain. It was unconscious, this smile was, though just after he had said something it got intensified for an instant. It came at the end of his speeches like a seal applied on the words to make the meaning of the commonest phrase appear absolutely inscrutable. He was a common trader, from his youth up employed in these parts, nothing more. He was obeyed, yet he inspired neither love nor fear nor even respect. He inspired uneasiness. That was it, uneasiness. Not a definite mistrust, just uneasiness. Nothing more. You have no idea how effective such a faculty can be. He had no genius for organizing, for initiative, or for order even. That was evident in such things as the deplorable state of the station. He had no learning and no intelligence. His position had come to him, why? Perhaps because he was never ill. Have you ever had a manager like this? He had no learning and no intelligence. His position had come to him. Why? And in this case in the Congo, perhaps because he was never ill. He had served 3 terms of 3 years out there. Because triumphant health in the general route of constitutions is a kind of power in itself. So he's incompetent, he inspires neither love nor respect, but he's a survivor. When he went home on leave, he rioted on a large scale, pompously. Jack ashore from his casual talk. Jack ashore, this is all just meaning basically that he partied like a true sailor during his time off. He originated nothing, he could keep the routine going, that's all. But he was great. He was great by this little thing that it was impossible to tell what could control such a man. He never gave that secret away. Perhaps there was nothing within him. Such a suspicion made one pause, for out there were no external checks. Once, when various tropical diseases had laid low almost every agent in the station, he was heard to say, "Men who come out here should have no entrails." He sealed the utterance with that smile of his, as though it had been a door opening into a darkness he had in his keeping. You fancied you had seen things, but the seal was on. When annoyed at meal times by the constant quarrels of the white men about precedence, he ordered an immense round table to be made, for which a special house had to be built. This was the station's mess room. Where he sat was the first place, the rest was nowhere. One felt this to be his unalterable conviction. He was neither civil nor uncivil. He was quiet. He allowed his boy, an overfed young Negro from the coast, to treat the white men under his very eyes with provoking insolence. He began to speak as soon as he saw me. I had been very long on the road. He could not wait. He had to start without me. The upriver stations had to be relieved. There had been so many delays already that he did not know who was dead and who was alive and how they got on, and so on, and so on. He paid no attention to my explanations, and, playing with a stick of sealing wax, repeated several times that the situation was very grave, very grave. There were rumors that a very important station was in jeopardy, and its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. Hoped it was not true. Mr. Kurtz was... I felt weary and irritable. Hang Kurtz, I thought. So quick recap of what's literally happening at this point. Marlowe has hiked 20 miles through the jungle just today to get to the central station. He notices that the vibes, once again, are severely off. And there's this guy, the manager, who's told to see it once. Marlowe's told that his ship is at the bottom of the river because basically some idiots took it out who didn't know how to sail it and sunk it. And the manager doesn't ask him to sit down after he's hiked 20 miles that morning. He just starts going off about how they need to get out as soon as possible to deliver supplies to other stations up the river, including the station where Mr. Kurtz, this sort of mysterious prodigy that Marlowe keeps hearing about. Mr. Kurtz hasn't had supplies from the central station in who knows how long, and the manager has heard that he's ill, which he hopes is not true. But Marlowe thinks, "Hang Kurtz." I interrupted him by saying I had heard of Mr. Kurtz on the coast. "Ah, so they talk of him down there," he murmured to himself. Then he began again, assuring me Mr. Kurtz was the best agent he had, an exceptional man of the greatest importance to the company. Therefore, I could understand his anxiety. He was, he said, very, very uneasy. Certainly, he fidgeted on his chair a good deal, exclaimed, "Ah, Mr. Kurtz," broke the stick of sealing wax, and seemed dumbfounded by the accident. Next thing he wanted to know how long it would take to... I interrupted him again. Being hungry, you know, and kept on my feet too, I was getting savage. "How could I tell?" I said. I hadn't even seen the wreck yet. Some months, no doubt. I'm talking about how long it'll take to fix the ship at the bottom of the river. All this talk seemed to me so futile. Some months, he said. Well, let us say 3 months before we can make a start. Yes, that ought to do the affair. I flung out of his hut. He lived all alone in a clay hut with a sort of veranda, muttering to myself my opinion of him. He was a chattering idiot. Afterwards, I took it back when it was borne upon me startlingly with what extreme nicety he had estimated the time requisite for the affair. So despite the fact that the manager hasn't let him sit down after hiking 20 miles and meeting him for the first time, the manager does give him a generous timeline of 3 months to fix the ship. I went to work the next day, turning, so to speak, my back on that station. In that way only, it seemed to me I could keep my hold on the redeeming facts of life. Still, one must look about sometimes, and then I saw this station, these men strolling aimlessly about in the sunshine of the yard. I asked myself sometimes what it all meant. They wandered here and there with their absurd long staves in their hands, like a lot of faithless pilgrims bewitched inside a rotten fence. This is an interesting, from a literary perspective, this is a really interesting simile comparison. When Marlowe says that all the agents, the white employees of this Belgian company at this station are like faithless pilgrims. I mean, a pilgrim is by definition someone who makes a long and arduous journey to some religious destination out of faith, right? So how are they faithless pilgrims? The word ivory rang in the air, was whispered, was sighed. So we see sort of what the religion is of these faithless pilgrims. Ivory, money. You would think they were praying to it. A taint of imbecile rapacity blew through it all like a whiff from some corpse. By Jove, I've never seen anything so unreal in my life. And outside, the silent wilderness surrounding this cleared speck on the earth struck me as something great and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently for the passing away of this fantastic invasion. Oh, these months! Well, never mind. Various things happened. One evening, a grass shed full of calico, cotton prints, beads, and I don't know what else, burst into a blaze so suddenly that you would have thought the earth had opened to let an avenging fire consume all that trash. I was smoking my pipe quietly by my dismantled steamer, and saw them all cutting capers in the light with their arms lifted high when the stout man with mustaches came tearing down to the river, a tin pail in his hand, assured me that everybody was behaving splendidly, dipped about a quart of water and tore back again. I noticed there was a hole in the bottom of his pail. The pail he's using to carry water to put out the fire has a hole in the bottom of it. I strolled up. There was no hurry. You see, the thing had gone off like a box of matches. This grass-walled shed where they're keeping calico, cotton prints, beads, and I don't know what else. It had burst into a blaze. And now Marlowe sees that the thing had gone off like a box of matches. It had been hopeless from the very first. The flame had leaped high, driven everybody back, lighted up everything, and collapsed. The shed was already a heap of embers glowing fiercely. A was being beaten nearby. They said he had caused the fire in some way. Be that as it may, he was screeching most horribly. So they've blamed the fire on an African, they're beating him, and he is screeching most horribly. And it's bothering Marlowe. I don't know if it's bothering him in the sense that he's already becoming kind of a sociopath and it's just annoying, or if he still has enough of his conscience that it's bothering him in that sense. Probably a bit of both. I saw him, the African man who they were beating, later on, for several days, sitting in a bit of shade looking very sick and trying to recover himself. Afterwards he arose and went out. and the wilderness without a sound took him into its bosom again. As I approached the glow from the dark, I found myself at the back of two men talking. I heard the name of Kurtz pronounced, then the words, "Take advantage of this unfortunate accident." One of the men was the manager. I wished him a good evening. "Did you ever see anything like it? It is incredible," he said, and walked off. The other man remained. He was a first-class agent, young, gentlemanly, a bit reserved, with a forked little beard and a hooked nose. He was standoffish with the other agents, and they on their side said he was the manager's spy upon them. That's a crucial line. It's really important for the next however many pages we're reading here. Looks like 8. So you have the manager who's saying something of taking advantage of this unfortunate accident. And then you have this guy who's an agent, so someone who works for the manager, whose job is, you'll hear what his job is supposed to be in a second. But here we are given his real job and his relationship to the other white men in the central station. He was standoffish with the other agents, doesn't get along with his coworkers. And they on their side said he was the manager's spy upon them. As to me, I had hardly ever spoken to him before. We got into talk, and by we strolled away from the hissing ruins. Then he asked me to his room, which was in the main buildings of the station. He struck a match, and I perceived that this young aristocrat had not only a silver-mounted dressing case, but also a whole candle all to himself. Just at that time, the manager was the only man supposedly to have any right to candles. Native mats covered the clay walls, a collection of spears, assagais, which is like a specific kind of spear found in the Congo. Shields, knives, was hung up in trophies. The business entrusted to this fellow was the making of bricks. That's what his job is supposed to be, making bricks. So I had been informed, but there wasn't a fragment of a brick anywhere in the station. And he had been there more than a year, waiting. It seems he could not make bricks without something. I don't know what. Straw, maybe. Anyway, it could not be found there, and as it was not likely to be sent from Europe, it did not appear clear to me what he was waiting for. An act of special creation, perhaps. However, they were all waiting, all the 16 or 20 pilgrims of them, for something. And upon my word, it did not seem an uncongenial occupation for the way they took it, though the only thing that ever came to them was a disease, as far as I could see. They beguiled the time by backbiting and intriguing against each other in a foolish kind of way. So all the white people at the station, all the European employees of this company at the central station, basically don't do anything except for scheme against each other in kind of posture and fight to be higher up on the food chain. There was an air of plotting about that station, but nothing came of it, of course. It was as unreal as everything else, as the philanthropic pretense of the whole concern, as their talk, as their government, as their show of work. The only real feeling was a desire to get appointed to a trading post where ivory was to be had, so that they could earn percentages. They intrigued and slandered and hated each other only on that account. But as to effectually lifting a little finger, oh no! By heavens, there is something after all in the world allowing one man to steal a horse while another must not look at a halter. Steal a horse straight out. Very well, he has done it. Perhaps he can ride. But there is a way of looking at a halter that would provoke the most charitable of saints into a kick. So this passage is kind of wild. Marlowe is saying, first of all, that no one's doing any actual work. As to effectually lifting a little finger, oh no, by heavens. Then he says, there is something after all in the world allowing one man to steal a horse while another must not look at a halter. So the European employees of this company are there to steal a horse, to extract ivory out of the Congo, while another, the Africans, the Congolese that they have forced into slave labor must not look at a halter, must not even raise their eyes to look at the money that's being pulled out of the Congo. Steal a horse straight out, very well, he has done it, perhaps he can ride. But there is a way of looking at a halter that would provoke the most charitable of saints into a kick. That sounds to me like Marlowe is saying that these Africans who are being forced into service of this Belgian enterprise have a way of looking at the wealth that the Europeans are taking out of their country in a way that's so annoying that it would provoke the most charitable of saints into a kick. Ugh. I had no idea why he wanted to be so sociable, but as we chatted in there, it suddenly occurred to me the fellow was trying to get at something. In fact, pumping me. He alluded constantly to Europe, to the people I was supposed to know there, putting leading questions as to my acquaintances in the sepulchral city, and so on. His little eyes glittered like mica discs with curiosity, though he tried to keep up a bit of superciliousness. Okay, again, there's more to unpack. So this guy, the brickmaker, who's really the manager's spy, is being very sociable with Marlowe, and Marlowe realizes the fellow was trying to get at something, putting leading questions as to my acquaintances in the sepulchral city. So this brickmaker, who's really the manager's spy, wants to understand exactly what connections Marlowe has to the company leadership in Belgium, in Brussels specifically. That's the sepulchral city. Though he tried to keep up a bit of superciliousness, which is a kind of patronizing arrogance, or perhaps a more modern definition of the word superciliousness would be douchebaggery. At first I was astonished, but very soon I became also awfully curious to see what he would find out for me. I couldn't possibly imagine what I had in me to make it worth his while. It was very pretty to see how he baffled himself, for in truth my body was full of chills, and my head had nothing in it but that wretched steamboat business. It was evident he took me for a perfectly shameless prevaricator. A prevaricator is someone who avoids giving straight answers, like a politician. At last he got angry, and to conceal a movement of furious annoyance, he yawned. I rose. Then I noticed a small sketch in oils on a panel representing a woman, draped and blindfolded, carrying a lighted torch. The background was somber, almost black. The movement of the woman was stately, and the effect of the torchlight on the face was sinister. It arrested me, and he stood by, civilly holding an empty half-pint champagne bottle, medical comforts, with a candle stuck in it. To my question he said Mr. Kurtz had painted this, in this very station, more than a year ago, while waiting for means to go to his trading post. Tell me, pray, said I, who is this Mr. Kurtz? So we know that he is some sort of prodigy, we know that he's important to the company leadership, and we also know that he's actually a bit of a painter. Who is this Mr. Kurtz? The chief of the inner station, he answered in a short tone, the brickmaker spy. Much obliged, I said, laughing, and you are the brickmaker of the central station. Everyone knows that. So Marlowe's like, cool, thanks for the absolute non-answer. He was silent for a while. He is a prodigy, he said at last. He is an emissary of pity and science and progress and devil knows what else. We want, he began to declaim suddenly, for the guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, so to speak, higher intelligence, wide sympathies, a singleness of purpose. Who says that? I asked. Lots of them, he replied. Some even write that, and so he comes here, a special being, as you ought to know. Why ought I to know? Okay, real quick, I just have to say, I think there's a really fascinating parallel here between what's happening in the Congo in roughly 1899 and what's happening in our economy today in 2026, what's everyone talking about in the market right now? Artificial intelligence. And what do we have here? The brickmaker says, we want, for the guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, so to speak, higher intelligence. And what do we get with AI? We get people like Sam Altman, who are doubtlessly intelligent and skilled and very capable people. And they're also sketchy as hell, super untrustworthy. And he's someone who's special, clearly very special, and it's clearly important to him that he's special. And yet there's something menacing about him and the system he's setting up. And man, if you look into how servers that are capable of hosting AI applications, if you look into how those are built, you see truly how little has changed since Heart of Darkness was published. Oftentimes it's still in the Congo, where they call them conflict minerals, are mined and extracted. And so, you know, we still have these like kind of mysterious personas. We have Mr. Kurtz, we have Sam Altman, and then we have like the brutality that's required to extract what's needed for their enterprises, while the rest of us, I don't know, sit around and talk about them. It's a little depressing how little has changed. So he comes here, a special being as you ought to know. Why ought I to know? I interrupted, really surprised. He paid no attention. Yes, today he is chief of the best station. Next year he will be assistant manager. 2 years more but I dare say you know what he will be in 2 years' time. You're of the new gang, the gang of virtue. And Marlowe's clearly not a super virtuous person, and yet at least he has work ethic, which does kind of give him a certain virtue compared to the agents who are just scheming against each other and not doing anything in this station. The same people who sent him, Mr. Kurtz, specially also recommended you, Marlowe. Oh, don't say no. I've my own eyes to trust. Light dawned upon me. My dear aunt's influential acquaintances were producing an unexpected effect upon that young man. I nearly burst into a laugh. Do you read the company's confidential correspondence? I asked. He hadn't a word to say. It was great fun. When Mr. Kurtz, I continued severely, is general manager, you won't have the opportunity. He blew the candle out suddenly, and we went outside. The moon had risen. Black figures strolled about listlessly, pouring water on the glow, whence proceeded a sound of hissing, steam ascending in the moonlight. So there's Africans who are pouring water onto the fire. The beaten groaned somewhere. What a row the brute makes, said the indefatigable man with the mustaches, appearing near us. Serve him right. Transgression, punishment, bang. Pitiless, pitiless. That's the only way. This will prevent all conflagrations for the future. I was just telling the manager. He noticed my companion and became crestfallen at once. Not in bed yet, he said with a kind of servile heartiness. It's so natural. Ha! Danger. Agitation. I'm still not entirely sure what to make of this passage. It's just like this random guy comes up and kind of gives them a word salad and runs away. He vanished. I went on to the riverside and the others followed me. I heard a scathing murmur at my ear. Heap of muffs. Go to. The pilgrims could be seen in knots, gesticulating, discussing. Several had still their staves in their hands. I verily believe they took these sticks to bed with them. Beyond the fence, the forest stood up spectrally in the moonlight, and through the dim stir, through the faint sounds of that lamentable courtyard, the silence of the land went home to one's very heart. Its mystery, its greatness, the amazing reality of its concealed life. The hurt moaned feebly somewhere nearby, and then fetched a deep sigh that made me mend my pace away from there. I felt a hand introducing itself under my arm. "My dear sir," said the fellow, "I don't want to be misunderstood, and especially by you who will see Mr. Kurtz long before I can have that pleasure. I wouldn't like him to get a false idea of my disposition." So this is the brickmaker slash spy coming up and trying to make sure that Marlowe doesn't give him a bad reputation with Mr. Kurtz. I let him run on, this papier-mâché Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles is like a devil. And it seemed to me that if I tried, I could poke my finger through him and find nothing inside but a little loose dirt, maybe. He, don't you see, had been planning to be assistant manager by and by under the present man, and I could see that the coming of that Kurtz had upset them both not a little. He talked precipitately, and I did not try to stop him. I had my shoulders against the wreck of my steamer, hauled up on the slope like a carcass of some big river animal. The smell of mud, of primeval mud, by Jove, was in my nostrils. The high stillness of primeval forests was before my eyes. There were shiny patches on the Black Creek. The moon had spread over everything a thin layer of silver. Over the rank grass, over the mud, upon the wall of matted vegetation standing higher than the wall of a temple, over the great river I could see through a somber gap glittering as it flowed broadly by without a murmur. All this was great, expectant, mute, while the man jabbered about himself. I wondered whether the stillness on the face of the immensity, looking at us two, were meant as an appeal or as a menace. What were we who had strayed in here? Could we handle that dumb thing? All this time he's talking about the land, and maybe the river too, of the Congo. Or would it handle us? I felt how big, how confoundedly big, was that thing that couldn't talk, and perhaps was deaf as well. What was in there? I could see a little Ivory coming out from there. I had heard Mr. Kurtz was in there. I had heard enough about it too, God knows. Yet somehow it didn't bring any image with it, no more than if I had been told an angel or a fiend was in there. I believed it in the same way one of you might believe there are inhabitants in the planet Mars. I knew once a Scotch sailmaker who was certain, dead sure, there were people in Mars. If you asked him for some idea how they looked and behaved, he would get shy and mutter something about walking on all fours. If you as much as smiled, he would, though a man of 60, offer to fight you. I would not have gone so far as to fight for Kurtz, but I went for him near enough to a lie. You know I hate, detest, and can't bear a lie, not because I am straighter than the rest of us, but simply because it appalls me. There is a taint of death, a flavor of mortality in lies, which is exactly what I hate and detest in the world, what I want to forget. It makes me miserable and sick, like biting something rotten would do. Temperament, I suppose. Well, I went near enough to it by letting the young fool there believe anything he liked to imagine as to my influence in Europe. I became in an instant as much of a pretense as the rest of the bewitched pilgrims. This, simply because I had a notion it somehow would be of help to that Kurtz, whom at the time I did not see. You understand? He was just a word for me. I did not see the man in the name any more than you do. Do you see him? Do you see the story? Do you see anything? It seems to me I am trying to tell you a dream, making a vain attempt, because no relation of a dream can convey the dream sensation, that commingling of absurdity, surprise, and bewilderment, in a tremor of struggling revolt, that notion of being captured by the incredible which is of the very essence of dreams. Now, for the first time in more than 10 pages, and this is only a 96-page novel, the quotation mark closes, Marlowe stops talking on the boat that is sailing out from London, and we get simply the line, "He was silent for a while." Quotation again. Marlowe speaks again. No, it is impossible. It is impossible to convey the life sensation of any given epoch of one's existence, that which makes its truth, its meaning, its subtle and penetrating essence. It is impossible. We live as we dream, alone. Close quotation. He paused again, Marlowe, as if reflecting, then added, Of course, in this you fellows see more than I could then. You see me, whom you know. Close quotation. It had become so pitch dark on the boat near London that we listeners could hardly see one another. For a long time already he, sitting apart, had been no more to us than a voice. There was not a word from anybody. The others might have been asleep, but I was awake. I listened on the watch for the sentence, for the word that would give me the clue to the faint uneasiness inspired by this narrative that seemed to shape itself without human lips in the heavy night air of the river. Yes, I let him run on, Marlowe began again, and think what he pleased about the powers that were behind me. I did, and there was nothing behind me. There was nothing but that wretched old mangled steamboat I was leaning against while he talked fluently about the necessity for every man to get on, and when one comes out here, you conceive, it is not to gaze at the moon. Mr. Kurtz was a universal genius, but even a genius would find it easier to work with adequate tools, intelligent men. He did not make bricks. Why, there was a physical impossibility in the way, as I was well aware, and if he did secretarial work for the manager, it was because no sensible man rejects wantonly the confidence of his superiors. Did I see it? I saw it. What more did I want? What I really wanted was rivets, by heaven, rivets, to get on with the work, to stop the hole. Rivets I wanted. There were cases of them down at the coast, cases, piled up, burst, split. You kicked a loose rivet at every second step in that station yard on the hillside. Rivets had rolled into the grove of death. You could fill your pockets with rivets for the trouble of stooping down, and there wasn't one rivet to be found where it was wanted. We had plates that would do, but nothing to fasten them with. And every week the messenger, a lone Negro, letter bag on shoulder and staff in hand, left our station for the coast. And several times a week a coast caravan came in with trade goods, ghostly glazed calico that made you shudder only to look at it, glass beads value about a penny a quart, confounded spotting cotton handkerchiefs, and no rivets. 3 carriers could have brought all that was wanted to set that steamboat afloat. So, the ship is actually not at the bottom of the river. It is up high enough that Marlowe can lean on it, but it's got a huge hole in the bottom. Marlowe wants to fix that hole just by putting sort of some, what does he call them? We had plates, so just like plates of metal that he could put in the way of the tear, and then he just needs rivets, like big nails essentially, to drive the plates into the bottom, the hull of the ship, and to prevent the leak, and then they could get sailing. There are more rivets than he could count, whole cases full of them back at the outer station, at the mouth of the Congo, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean, but here in the central station, there are no rivets, and he can't seem to get any. He, the brickmaker, was becoming confidential now, but I fancy my unresponsive attitude must have exasperated him at last, for he judged it necessary to inform me he feared neither God nor devil, let alone any mere man. I said I could see that very well, but what I wanted was a certain quantity of rivets, and rivets were what really Mr. Kurtz wanted, if he had only known it. Now letters went to the coast every week. "My dear sir," he cried, "I write from dictation." I demanded rivets. There was a way for an intelligent man. So he's managed to sort of let people think that he has more influence with the company than he actually does, and he's trying to use that trick to just get some rivets so he can fix the damn boat. He changed his manner, became very cold, and suddenly began to talk about a hippopotamus. Wondered whether sleeping on board the steamer. I stuck to my salvage night and day. I wasn't disturbed. There was an old hippo that had the bad habit of getting out of the bank and roaming at night over the station grounds. The pilgrims used to turn out in a body and empty every rifle they could lay hands on at him. Some even had sat up nights for him. All this energy was wasted, though. That animal has a charmed life, he said. But you can say this only of brutes in this country. No man, you apprehend me? No man here bears a charmed life. He stood there for a moment in the moonlight with his delicate hooked nose set a little askew and his mica eyes glittering without a wink. Then, with a curt good night, he strode off. Good girl. I could see he was disturbed and considerably puzzled, which made me feel more hopeful than I had been for days. It was a great comfort to turn from that chap to my influential friend, the battered, twisted, ruined tin-pot steamboat. I clambered on board. She, the ship, rang under me like an empty tin, kicked along a gutter. She was nothing so solid in make and rather less pretty in shape, but I had expended enough work on her to make me love her. So it's a little hard to track what's happening here because Marlowe's jumping around time, but at this point he's already been working on the ship for a while, and it's getting better, but it's not ready to sail. No influential friend would have served me better. She, again the ship, had given me a chance to come out a bit, to find out what I could do. No, I don't like work. I had rather laze about and think of all the fine things that can be done. I don't like work, no man does, but I like what is in the work, the chance to find yourself. Would you agree? Your own reality for yourself, not for others, what no other man can ever know. They can only see the mere show, and never can tell what it really means. I was not surprised to see somebody sitting aft on the deck with his legs dangling over the mud. You see, I rather chummed with the few mechanics there out in that station, whom the other pilgrims naturally despised, on account of their imperfect manners, I suppose. This was the foreman, a boiler-maker by trade, a good worker. So Marlowe's on his half-sunken ship, and he sees that he has a visitor, a mechanic. He was a lank, bony, yellow-faced man with big, intense eyes. His aspect was worried, and his head was as bald as the palm of my hand. But his hair, in falling, seemed to have stuck to his chin, and he prospered in the new locality, for his beard hung down to his waist. He was a widower with 6 young children. He had left them in charge of a sister of his to come out here. And the passion of his life was pigeon flying. He was an enthusiast and a connoisseur. He would rave about pigeons. After work hours, he used sometimes to come over from his hut for a talk about his children and his pigeons. At work, when he had to crawl in the mud under the bottom of the steamboat, he would tie up that beard of his in a kind of white serviette he brought for the purpose. It had loops to go over his ears. In the evening, he would be seen squatted on the bank rinsing that wrapper in the creek with great care, then spreading it solemnly on a bush to dry. I slapped him on the back and shouted, "We shall have rivets!" He scrambled to his feet, exclaiming, "No, rivets?" as though he couldn't believe his ears. Then, in a low voice, "You... eh?" I don't know why we behaved like lunatics. I put my finger to the side of my nose and nodded mysteriously. "Good for you," he cried, snapped his fingers above his head. Lifting one foot, I tried a jig. We capered on the iron deck. A frightful clatter came out of that empty hulk, and the virgin forest on the other bank of the creek sent it back in a thundering roll upon the sleeping station. It must have made some of the pilgrims sit up in their hovels. A dark figure obscured the lighted doorway of the manager's hut. vanished. Then, a second or so after, the doorway itself vanished too. We stopped, and the silence driven away by the stamping of our feet flowed back again from the recesses of the land. The great wall of vegetation, an exuberant and entangled mass of trunks, branches, leaves, boughs, festoons, motionless in the moonlight, was like a rioting invasion of soundless life. A rolling wave of plants, piled up, crested, ready to topple over the creek to sweep every little man of us out of his little existence. And it moved not. A deadened burst of mighty splashes and snorts reached us from afar, as though an ichthyosaurus, it's like a cross between a dolphin and an alligator, this dinosaur, ichthyosaurus, had been taking a bath of glitter in the great river. After all, said the boilermaker in a reasonable tone, why shouldn't we get the rivets? Why not indeed? I did not know of any reason why we shouldn't. They'll come in 3 weeks, I said confidently. But they didn't. Instead of rivets, there came an invasion, an infliction, a visitation. It came in sections during the next 3 weeks, each section headed by a donkey, carrying a white man in new clothes and tan shoes, bowing from that elevation right and left to the impressed pilgrims. A quarrelsome band of footsore, sulky, trod on the heels of the donkey. A lot of tents, camp stools, tin boxes, white cases, brown bales would be shot down in the courtyard, and the air of mystery would deepen a little over the muddle of the station. 5 such installments came with their absurd air of disorderly flight with the loot of innumerable outfit shops and provision stores that, one would think, they were lugging after a raid into the wilderness for equitable division. It was an inextricable mess of things, decent in themselves, but that human folly made look like the spoils of thieving. This devoted band called itself the El Dorado Exploring Expedition, and I believe they were sworn to secrecy. Their talk, however, was the talk of sordid buccaneers. It was reckless without hardihood, greedy without audacity, and cruel without courage. There was not an atom of foresight or of serious intention in the whole batch of them, and they did not seem aware these things are wanted for the work of the world. To tear treasure out of the bowels of the land was their desire, with no more moral purpose at the back of it than there is in burglars breaking into a safe. Who paid the expenses of the noble enterprise? I don't know, but the uncle of our manager was the leader of the lot. So, before we get to our final 2 paragraphs for today, just to clarify what's happening here, Marlowe manages to convince the people who are in power at the station, the manager and the bricklayer, who's really the manager's spy. Marlowe manages to convince them, mainly just by staying silent, that Marlowe has some sort of connections to the company leadership back in Brussels. Marlowe uses this to try and get some rivets, basically big nails, to fix his damn ship, because that's all he needs, is just some rivets. And yet, instead of getting rivets, what comes is this devoted band, which called itself the El Dorado Exploring Expedition. Their talk was the talk of sordid buccaneers, dirty pirates. To tear treasure out of the bowels of the land was their desire. The uncle of our manager was leader of that lot. So there's more Nepo babies here in the Congo. In exterior, he, the leader of this expedition, resembled a butcher in a poor neighborhood, and his eyes had a look of sleepy cunning. He carried his fat paunch with ostentation on his short legs, and during the time his gang infested the station spoke to no one but his nephew, the manager. You could see these two roaming about all day, long with their heads close together in an everlasting confab. I had given up worrying myself about the rivets. One's capacity for that kind of folly is more limited than you would suppose. I said, hang, and let things slide. I had plenty of time for meditation, and now and then I would give some thought to Kurtz. I wasn't very interested in him. No. Still, I was curious to see whether this man, who had come out equipped with moral ideas of some sort, would climb to the top after all, and how he would set about his work when there. Whew. We made it to the end. If you have watched this far, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll be back. Hopefully, we'll be back. Hopefully within the next 10 days or so with another video, because frankly, this is taking longer than I hoped it would. I'm going to try and pick up the pace a bit on the videos and get them out more quickly. This is like an absolutely incredible work of art. It's just dark and bloody and long. I'm glad to be going through it, and I hope you are too. And before I cut the recording, I'm just going to pet her, give her some belly rubs, which she usually quite likes. Okay, it looks like she's only willing to give me the side belly today. See if we can get the full thing next time. So you have so much hair that we need to take off. Ugh. All right, let's give you a salmon treat, and then we'll go. You stayed with me. You stayed with me the whole time. Thank you. Thank you, sweetie. Here you go. Good girl. Thanks for watching.